name is Teresa Q. Johnson, and I am in cohort 8 with a concentration in MLK studies. And I would like to welcome you to the third luncheon in the MLK Legacy series. Could we please have a moment of silence to reflect upon the philosophy of Dr. King and his impact upon our individual lives. Thank you. And we're going to go ahead and start with our meal, and I'll be back with you shortly. And who is very dear to this institution. Since assuming presidency of this institution in 2003, President Sablet has been committed to its mission and has supported the cause of social justice throughout the university, and in particular, the emphasis on social justice in our doctoral program. His support of the development and subsequent growth of the MLK Scholars Program is one of many examples of this long-standing commitment to social justice. Please join me in welcoming our president, Dr. Roger Sablet.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's my pleasure to welcome each of you to the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Luncheon 2011, which is always associated with our Martin Luther King Jr. Scholars Program as a part of our doctoral residences. We are particularly proud of our MLK scholars and the contributions they are making and will make in future days to furthering the dreams and hopes of Dr. King. I also want to welcome individuals from our community this morning and greet you warmly on behalf of all of us at Union Institute and University who have the privilege of studying and working in this unique university setting. From its very beginning, Union has been committed to helping people through education, exploring and seeking social justice for all, serving the underserved, and seeking alternative ways of delivering high-quality learning opportunities to diverse populations of adults. Because many saw Union as different, the university has sometimes been marginalized in its history, even in our own community. However, Union is a national institution with its headquarters here in Cincinnati. However, its reach goes way beyond Cincinnati and way beyond Ohio. The first female Prime Minister of Jamaica was a graduate of Union's undergraduate program in Florida. We have had members who have served in the Congress of the United States and in state legislatures across the country. And we look forward to having future leaders sitting in this room today who will serve armed with a Union education, focusing on serving others rather than seeking only personal advances. Martin Luther King Jr. had a vision for this country. He articulated that vision perhaps like no other leader of his time. And as is often the case with visionaries, he paid the ultimate price with his life. It is appropriate that Union, which is regarded sometimes as a bit different than many educational institutions, takes the time to celebrate the life and contributions of Dr. King, who was also a bit different from many leaders, through this brief moment of food, fellowship, intellectual energy, and money to work with the passionate scholars who comprise the Martin Luther King Scholars Program. I want to express my appreciation to Dr. Nancy Boxell and to Dr. Larry Preston and all of the King Scholars for their work in behalf of all of us in leading us to a better society based on the bone-deep respect of the individual integrity of every person, which Dr. King also believed in. I think Dr. King would have been proud of each of you and your commitment to others. I encourage you to keep the faith of service to others in your heart always. For after all, faith is daring the soul to go beyond what the eyes cannot see. This is the ultimate honor to Dr. King's dreams. You're going to have a great opportunity to hear a distinguished speaker in a few moments, and I welcome all of our guests to this Martin Luther King Jr. Luncheon. Thank you for being here today, and thank each of you for being involved in the life of this university. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Savette. Now I would like to introduce to you two more hard workers in the cause of social justice. Our provost, would you please stand? Dr. Rich Hansen. Our dean, Dr. Larry Preston. Thank you. And MLK Studies Committee, as I told you, today, would you please stand? Dr. Nancy Boxell. Dr. Virgil Wood. Dr. Sylvia Hill. Reverend Aaron Dobneys. Mr. Barry Sims. Dr. Andrea Scarpino. We also have today with us several trusted servants of various community groups. The Cincinnati MLK Coalition, would you please stand? Anyone here from the Cincinnati? Representatives from the Cincinnati African American Chamber of Commerce, would you please stand? And if there are Morehouse alums, would you please stand? And at this time, I will turn the podium over to Dr. Virgil Wood for the introduction of our speaker.
Make everybody happy by eating first.
Well, build those tummies and we'll get back with you.
Thank you. Technology challenge. Before I present our guest, I want to acknowledge the presence of a neighbor to us from the University of Cincinnati, professor and department in the Department of Africana Studies, editor of the International Journal of Africana Studies, Dr. Terry Kershaw. Dr. Kershaw, would you stand, please? Mr. President, our colleagues in this great work, I am just delighted to have this privilege to present our speaker of the hour. I will do it with dispatch because I should not impinge on his time. You do have notes there in your program on our speaker. You'll have a chance to read all of the notes, but I do want to call one or two things to our attention. Today represents a very high watermark in the evolution of the Martin Luther King program. And we're delighted that our speaker has made it possible to be with us today. He is a theologian, pastor, and leader. He has been actively involved in advocating for the achievements of education, human rights, social justice issues for many, many years. His work spans the globe, and he has done signal work around the globe with Aaron Gandhi and Mahatma Gandhi's grandson. They've done great work across the globe. Our speaker has been named by the editorial board of the magazine more than several times as one of the 15 greatest preachers in America. Now, I know that's not what the way Ebony said it. Ebony said one of the 15 greatest black preachers in America, but I'm going to say one of the 15 greatest preachers in America because he is. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my happy privilege to present at this time, and would you give him a warm union greeting, Dr. Otis Moss, Jr. Dr. Moss.
Thank you so much, Dr. Virgil Wood, a friend, colleague of many years. Our time service go back to the early years of our work with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and our affiliation with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Dr. Virgil was one of the young, I would say, original, radical, non-violent soldiers in the army of SCLC and civil rights, human rights movement. In those days, Edwina Moss, my wife, was a member of the staff of Dr. King, and prior to that, I lived, of course, in Atlanta, and in Georgia, where I was born, and my first wife was a student at Spelman during part of my graduate studies in Atlanta, and we moved to Cincinnati, where she died at the age of 25, and Dr. King was the eulogist. And then when Edwina and I married Dr. King, and one of our college professors co-officiated at our wedding on the campus of Morehouse College. When Dr. Wood and I get together, there is so much ground to cover that we never have enough time. Mr. President, and to the Dean and Provost, and the academic leaders of this breakthrough endeavor in higher education and in global education, I greet you and thank you in behalf of so many for the work you are doing and the kind of scholars who come through these disciplines who will truly make a difference in a special way throughout the 21st century and beyond. It is a privilege to come to Cincinnati, where I spent so many years in service, labor, growth, and understanding. I served for a few years on the board of directors of the University of Cincinnati, and also on its adjunct faculty. There's a whole story behind that. I will not give the details. But there was a great deal of protest taking place. And my faculty membership grew out of that protest. Sometimes in an informal way we might share what some of the dynamics were. There is a great deal of history in this place, and we have such a distance yet to go. I want to say a few words about prophetic and historic moments in the life of Martin Luther King Jr. Really history-bearing and history-changing moments. If you observe or study the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., you will discover many historic and prophetic moments whose contents enrich our nation from generation to generation. The content expands our hope and contributes to the march of human dignity, justice, love, and reconciliation. I have from time to time sought to delineate a few of those moments, and I think I have listed from time to time about 25. I will not give all of those. I have a 5 o'clock flight. Sometimes on this highway of hope, love, justice, and redemption, we shall meet again and continue the conversation. For example, one of those moments, or some of those moments, could be underscored as follows. From Dr. King's birth home on Auburn Avenue, 511 Auburn Avenue, to the heart of then downtown Atlanta, which was called 5 Points. There is a story filled with sociology, culture, history, economic development, institutional expressions, and one could really do a serious piece of historical analysis, research, and study if you just took a short journey from Dr. King's birth home to downtown Atlanta and look at the period of his early life and what the dynamics were as you walk down Auburn Avenue, starting with his birth home, a fire station that was segregated, and then the Ebenezer Baptist Church, and on the next corner, the Wheat Street Baptist Church, where an icon in liberation theology served as pastor for 50 years and gave the original, in 1944, praise poetic selection to black people, I Am Somebody, can be found today in the rare collections of the Library of Congress. Across the street from Wheat Street was a very outstanding, prosperous African-American funeral home owned and operated by an industrious black woman who was a member and trustee at Wheat Street, and then there was a great barbecue stand. Oh yes. And then across the street Next to Wheat Street was the WERD radio station, owned and operated by black people, and the chief commentator on that station was an English professor from the Atlanta University Center. And then down the street there was the Masonic Hall, and across the street all kinds of entertainment and theaters where people like Calloway and Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Jordan, just to name a few, came literally on a weekly basis. And then there were barber shops and beauty shops. There was a business school. There was a college of cosmetology. There was an insurance company, the Pilgrim Life, and there was the Black Bank that did not go under during the Depression, where Martin Luther King Sr. served on the board of directors. And next to that bank was the Big Bethel AME Church, where Bishop Henry McNeil Turner once served. And across the street there was an insurance company, the Alexander and Associates Company, and up the street from the insurance company there was the Federal Loan and Savings Association, owned and operated by black people, the president of whom was a member of the Board of Trustees at Ebenezer. And up from that there was the Atlanta Daily Newspaper, with offices in Memphis and Birmingham. And across the street from the Atlanta Daily World was a black printing company, and next door to the American Printing Company was the Atlanta Life Insurance Company that was founded in the basement of Wheat Street Baptist Church. All of this on Auburn Avenue. And by the time you moved down that avenue and hit 5 Points, the heart of Atlanta, there were some strange and peculiar contradictory signs saying colored only, white only. But if you took the journey down Auburn Avenue and had all of those experiences, by the time you got to 5 Points, you knew that there was not anything wrong with you as a black person, but there was something psychologically, spiritually, politically, and sociologically wrong with the people who put up those signs. That was one of those great moments in the life of Martin Luther King Jr., a part of the story that has not been adequately told. Then you got a bus, a trolley, at 5 Points, and went over to what was then Fair and Chestnut Streets, and disembarked at Yates and Milton Drugstore, owned by black people, and entered the campus according to your decisions of either Clark, Atlanta University, Morehouse, or 1 block Spelman. And after coming through the center of a party at 5 Points and walking into the chapel at Morehouse College on Tuesday morning, Martin Luther King Jr. heard a president by the name of Benjamin Elijah Mays, who said, whatever you do it so well that the living, the dead, or the unborn couldn't do it any better. Never allow the world to dismiss you because of lazy or sloppy work. If you're going to teach so well that even the students who couldn't pass your course will have to admit that you were a great teacher. if you're going to practice medicine, do it so well that the community can't talk about good doctors unless they honestly call your name. If you're going to preach so well that even those who despise you will have to say, here is a person of God. Should it, and this is the part that Dr. King internationalized, should it fall your lot to be a street sweeper? Sweep streets like Michelangelo carved marble. Sweep streets like Langston Hughes composed poetry. Sweep streets like Marian Anderson sang Ave Maria. Sweep streets so well that all of the host of heaven will have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper. It is a job well. It was that kind of mentoring that Dr. King received. And I say again, we have not done a comprehensive study yet of the movement from 511 Auburn Avenue, 5 Points, or downtown Atlanta, in the midst of apartheid, to the campuses of the colleges that made up and make up the Atlanta University Center. A great prophetic and historic moment in the life of anyone. Dr. Dr. Wood described Auburn Avenue as one of the greatest avenues in the world. He said there's a president on every corner and a dean in between. It was this kind of nurturing, this kind of feeding, if you will, this kind of sight, insight, and foresight that Dr. King met on a daily basis. And if you think about that, and then compare the journey that so many of our children make every morning and every evening to and from school and to home and to shopping malls, and look at what they need. And the persons who touch their lives from their front door to the school door, to the shopping mall, and to other places, we can ask ourselves, what are we doing to nurture the next generation? We are doing much, but obviously not enough. Let me quickly underscore another great moment when Dr. King moved from his junior year in high school to a freshman in college. Now, in 1957, Time magazine did its first special article, a focus on Dr. King, with his picture, photograph on the cover, which was a breakthrough. They talked about in that article Dr. King's entering Morehouse College at the age of 15. Early admission student. But one of the things that the Time magazine article did not give in detail was how and why and what the vision was that brought him to the college campus from his junior year in high school as a 15-year-old teenager. 1944, half the student body, if not more, of Morehouse College had been drafted into the military. And those who had not been drafted were probably Class A, waiting to be. We were at war. Some of the trustees recommended to Dr. Mays that they should close the college until the war was over. Dr. Mays said, no, should we close the college, it will never open again. And they introduced the early admission program. And Dr. King was a part of that early admission program. Now, the Ford Foundation funded a similar type program in the 1950s. But Dr. Mays' vision in the 40s kept the college alive and brought to the campus some of the brightest and greatest potential minds in the nation. Dr. King was a part of that group. Another historic and prophetic moment. Now, the prophetic insight in that instance came from the president of Morehouse College. And the beneficiary was Martin Luther King Jr., whose father had graduated from Morehouse in the class of 31, whose grandfather had attended Morehouse in the early 1900s, probably starting in the late 1800s. Another historic and prophetic moment. And Dr. King's call and answer to the Christian ministry while he was dreaming of becoming a lawyer or a doctor or a distinguished college professor. And another moment at 19, entering Crozet Theological Seminary, one of 6 black students in the whole student body. And he became president of the student body and graduated valedictorian with his lowest grade in public speaking. When I get to heaven, yes, sir, I want to meet that professor. Now, if some smart aleck wants to say, Otis, suppose he's not there, my answer will be, what you ask him? With the valedictorian distinction and the fellowship in his hand for doctoral studies at 22, Boston University. And Dr. Harold DeWolf said, of all the students he mentored during his career, I heard him say these words, during his career at Boston University, Martin Luther King Jr. would be in the top 5 of all the students in his career. Now, another prophetic and historic moment. When he completed his doctoral studies at Boston, he had some choices, some options. 3 colleges offered him, made very appealing offers to him. 3 colleges. Howard, Virginia Union, and Morehouse. 2 churches, one in Massachusetts and one in New York, had a keen interest. And Dr. King accepted the unanimous call at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church with about 300 members, if you counted the living and the dead. with a sanctuary, an auditorium that could scarcely seat 500 people without violating the fire codes. He answered that call against backdrop of 3 hours from distinguished institutions of higher learning and the great interest of 2 northern urban congregations. Now, that had to be a prophetic, historic moment. Not knowing, in the words of Paul, what would befall him there. But he answered the call. Now, here is another moment to that. Many people have missed the wedding. The wedding of Coretta Scott and Martin King Jr. Now, Coretta is generally known through media and other writings as that brilliant woman who graduated from Antioch, entered on scholarship, graduated from high school, valedictorian, and went on to the New England Conservatory of Music. There she and Mark met. But most of the records do not talk about Marion, Alabama, Perry County. The late Gene Young came from that same city, community. Marion, Alabama. Now, while Dr. King was growing up in a sophisticated section, middle-class black Atlanta, with all of the advantages and protections that the King family and the Ebenezer Baptist Church and the Atlanta University Center and Auburn Avenue and all that they offered, even in a segregated society, Marion, Alabama, was altogether different, with some exceptions. Now, Coretta grew up on her father's farm, on the farm of her loving father, where they owned several acres of land in the hundreds. But they were attacked periodically by the Klan. And before Coretta got to Antioch, she was driving her father's truck on the farm and picking cotton. You're too young to know what that phraseology means. Literal fact and literal truth. She had the capacity as a teenager of picking 200 to 250 pounds of cotton per day on her parents' farm. Now, that's another area of great investigation, sociological, economic, and historical study in terms that the late Dr. Horace Mann Bond did some of this before his death. Talked about the father, Julian Bond, who served as president of two colleges, Lincoln and Fort Valley, a distinguished educator, did some research on the number of black PhDs coming out of Perry County, Alabama. How did it happen? What were the circumstances? And what were the doors that were open that no one seemed to be able to shut, even with all of the forces of the KKK, that would give you a Coretta Scott King out of Perry County, Alabama? And the young author says that Coretta was much more radical than Martin Luther King Jr. because she had already endured fires and bombings and burnings, because her father's store was burned down twice. Yet the marriage of these two brilliant individuals, another prophetic and historic moment. To know when to say yes, when to say no, and then be willing to spend the rest of your life living with the consequences of that decision. That is a prophetic and historic moment. And then, to be the youngest pastor in town, the most recent, the one with the least amount of tenure, amid all of the bishops, theologues, high theologians, all of the elected and self-appointed bishops. To be called at that special moment to lead the Montgomery protest, unanimously elected. Now, according to his resume of achievements at that moment, he didn't qualify. He didn't have a single honorary degree. No trophies on the wall. But he became the president and the spokesperson. And another prophetic and historic moment when within 20 minutes after the election, he had to prepare for the greatest speech, the most important speech of his life. 20 minutes. Now, he had come through a discipline, a seminary discipline that says you ought to spend 1 hour of preparation for every minute you stand to preach in the pulpit. Now, I wish some folk could hear that now. Dr. Gardner Taylor tells a very interesting story about that, where the minister prepared a whole lot of stuff on the first 15 minutes, and then he said in the last few, he went on the Holy Spirit. Somebody said, well, Reverend,
That first 15 minutes is way better than that last 15 minutes, the Holy Spirit. But I want to go somewhere with this because it's the one moment I want to underscore. When Dr. King stood up that night, December 5th, 1955, he introduced a theological, philosophical, and spiritual paradigm that he did not violate for the next decade and almost 3 years. He closed the message by saying, if you will protest with courage, dignity, and Christian love, when the history books are written in the future, the historians will have to pause and say, there lived a great people, a black people, who injected new meaning into the veins of civilization. This, he said, is our overwhelming challenge and our overwhelming responsibility. It was the first time I may boldly state that in the history of our nation, in the history of mass movements in America, that a philosophical, theological, spiritual paradigm, presupposition had been set forth in such a way that everything initiated, done, or accomplished in the movement would be judged internally and externally by that paradigm. And if you go from Montgomery to Memphis, you will see the consistency. Non-violent paradigm became the guiding force of the movement we participated in. What a prophetic and historic moment. That brings me something I want to lift up here, but briefly. Your mission in this union, in this cohort, is to collectively put together a paradigm that can guide this nation for the rest of the century. That is your, and I say your because I'm in retirement. I'm in the exit lane. You're in the driving lane. Your decisions are almost omnipotent. But don't forget the almost. At the beginning of the 20th century, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois defined the century. He did it. If you don't believe it, read The Souls of Black Folk. He defined the century. Thurgood Marshall reintroduced the Constitution as a living document. And these were the two things that guided the human rights movement in the first half of the 20th century. Dr. King defined the latter half of the 20th century. Now, that brings me to another prophetic and historic moment. Everybody remembers the March on Washington, even those who were not born can remember. Those who didn't participate will tell you they were there. All of those my age and Bertha Wood's age were at the march, even though we didn't see them. They were there. And the more you talk with them, the closer and closer they got to the platform. That was a great proclamation given that day. I can never forget the words of Rabbi Prince when he talked about the Holocaust experience in Germany. And then he said there was something afoot in the world worse than the others. And that was the silence. Silence of so-called good folk. What an indictment. Everybody remembers I Have a Dream. It still rings. I listen to it and shout all over again. But one of the most prophetic statements came at the march, Dr. Wood, in one line. And that was the introduction that A. Philip Randolph gave to Martin Luther King Jr. And he simply said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the moral leader of our nation, Martin Luther King Jr., Jr." That's a heavy introduction, but it was true. It was among the most prophetic statements given at the march, with the exception of Dr. King's speech. The moral leader of our nation. That's another dissertation. What does it mean to be a moral leader? Dr. King, speaking at Riverside some years later, said he had inherited a vocation of agony. The moral leader of our nation. You represent a group, a collection, a cohort of disciplined minds. I could even say privileged persons, women and men, who will come up against some of the most formidable forces of the world, starting in your own context. Can you be the moral leader in academia, in prison, reform, and that's too light a word, in teaching, in preaching, in research, in writing, in the arts, all of the human endeavors speaking to the human condition. There's a lot of stuff we're not sure of. But every generation is short in that arena. And you know something? God, I believe, often hides the prophets until God is ready for them to be revealed. Because if God did not hide the devil, their own families and friends would destroy them even before the enemies got to them. All of that is wrapped up in being a moral leader. There is another historic and prophetic moment that we're all familiar with. It's found in the letter from the Birmingham jail. Some people don't know it, but many people in the inner circle were pleading with Dr. King in Birmingham not to go to jail, because so many folk were already in jail and on their way to jail, and nobody had any money to get them out. And the danger was to have all of these young people and adults locked up and nobody to get them out. There was a danger of an internal rebellion because their parents did not want them in jail. They had gone to jail against the wishes of their parents and their teachers. They locked the school doors and they jumped out of the windows and presented themselves against the forces of fire hoses and vicious police dogs and mean police forces. So the conventional wisdom was that, Dr. King, you need to hit the road and get some bail bond money and some defense fund money. But Dr. King went into a room all by himself and spent some time in prayer and came out and put on his jacket, dressed in overalls, gentleman, and said, I'm going to jail. I cannot bear for all of these people to go to jail and I'm out traveling up and down the nation. And he did. That decision changed the movement. But let me go back for just a moment. 3 years prior to that time, 1960, a prophetic and historic moment. We were involved in the sit-in movement in Atlanta, and I honestly state at this point the invitation of the new president. He unpacked, postponed his trip, and said, if the students want me, I'll go. He was arrested at Rich's department store, along with all of the others, and I was designated not to go to jail, which was not a happy designation in those days, because I was to be the lead negotiator to meet with the mayor about this college students, university students, and we are the committee to change a city. And we went to the mayor and said, we demand these skilled, experienced negotiators. We demand that all students arrested be released without bail. You see, that does not violate our principle. And guess what? The mayor said, yeah, I can do that. We further demand that all lunch counters in Atlanta be segregated and that you, Mr. Mayor, will negotiate with the merchants and bring us a progress report in 30 days. He said, I'll do that too. All of the students were released, and when they were released, there was a deputy sheriff on a patrol car waiting outside of the prison to rearrest Dr. King and take him to DeKalb County, Decatur, Georgia. And the sheriff sent word to Dr. King that you will be safer in my jail, to use his words, than you will be in DeKalb County. And those of you from Atlanta understand the dynamic here. Yes. So here we are. Everybody released, and Dr. King in jail all by himself. We felt guilty and ashamed. When the students gathered a few minutes after their release at Pascal's restaurant, that was the place to go. Mrs. King walked in, pregnant, expectant, and asked, where is wife? Yes. Jesse Hill, myself, and others had to explain what had happened. That Monday morning, the sheriff deputies picked up Dr. King at the Fulton County Jail, put handcuffs on him. And one of them said to Dr. King, we're doing this for your protection. I still don't understand that. Took him to the courtroom, Judge Mitchell's court, Oscar Mitchell. And while Attorney Hollowell, the civil rights lawyer, was in the process of arguing the case, the judge looked down and said, how much more time is this going to take? I got a fishing trip coming up. All of this in the court of law. The judge sentenced Dr. King 4 to 6 months, public works, hard labor, Georgia chain, for a trumped up minor traffic violation that the court said was in force at the time of his arrest. Therefore, because he participated in the sit-in, his probation was revoked, and he had to go to jail and serve out the time. And before the judge could make the appeal, between midnight and dawn the next day, they went to Dr. King's cell, put chains on his body, threw him in the back of a security wagon, and drove 230 miles across the state to Reedsville Prison. And put him in solitary confinement. And here comes, I will not go too much further on this, another historic and prophetic moment. While in prison, Dr. King wrote a letter that's not talked about much. I refer to it, and others also, as the letter from the Reedsville prison. Started it out addressed to Mrs. King. Hello, darling. He told her what the visitation hours were and what books to bring him. Told her how painful it was to be away from her children, and asked her to get in touch with Wyatt Walker. He needed to talk with him. He told her to bring 2 volumes of Tillich, another writing by E. Stanley Jones, and of course, his Bible. And then he told her the exact place to look on his desk and bring a book, Increasing Your Word Power. And some select sermons, and named the sermons and told her where to find them. But in the upper paragraphs of the letter, he said this: I have the faith to believe that the suffering coming to us now will somehow turn out to make Atlanta a better city, Georgia a better state, and America a better nation. Then he closed the paragraph by saying, just how I do not yet know, but I have the faith to believe that somehow it will. And he closed the letter, eternally yours, mine. Within a few days, Senator John Fitzgerald Kennedy, running for president against Richard Nixon, intervened, had Robert Kennedy to call the judge, and Senator Kennedy called Mrs. King. And when I don't know what they told the judge, but I do know the judge released him. Let him go!
Yeah, that's right.
And when he was released, we held a mass meeting at the Ebenezer Baptist Church. Daddy King stood up that night. I was on the platform and said, you know, I had endorsed Nixon. I have never been able to write so well I didn't need an eraser on my pen. Tonight, I'm getting rid of all of this Nixon paraphernalia. And if I had the power to do it, I would put all the votes in a suitcase and take them and dump them in the lap of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And that night, Nixon literature literally went in the garbage can. And in Atlanta, Detroit, Los Angeles, Cleveland, Chicago, New York, St. Louis, San Francisco, that was a shift. A few days before the election, and President Kennedy won by less than 1/2 vote per precinct. Historians are afraid to say it, but Martin Luther King Jr. elected President Kennedy from a jail cell. Now, and I'm almost through. Lyndon Johnson. When Kennedy was assassinated, what a tragedy. When Kennedy was assassinated, Johnson moved to the presidency and was elected the next year by landslide. So Dr. King elected 2 presidents from a jail cell. And some years later, a white brother from Plains, Georgia, said to us privately and said it later publicly, but for Martin Luther King Jr., I could not be a candidate for President of the United States from Plains, Georgia. You won. So, Dr. King elected 2 presidents from jail cell and another president from the grave. And then, in 1992, a young man from Hope, Arkansas, standing on the shoulders of the civil rights movement with the advice of persons like Andrew Young, Vernon Judd, all from the movement, became president. So, Dr. King elected a 4th president from the grave. And then, one night, on November, what was the date? November 4th, 2008. A young man named Barack Obama. Time will not permit. Standing on the shoulders of Martin Luther King Jr., nominated on August 28th, the day of the I Have a Dream speech, the anniversary date. So 5 presidents have been elected out of the content of the prophetic and historic labors of Martin Luther King Jr. Now, there is a young woman from Rwanda who hid in a bathroom with 7 or 8 other women during the Rwandan Holocaust. 90 days packed in a bathroom, not big enough for one person. 90 days. And during that period, her mother and father were assassinated. Her brother was killed, and when the opposing member of the family killed her brother, he cut open his head and took his machete and picked out his brains and said, I just want to see what the brains of a master's degree holder look like. And when the horror subsided, the daughter who survived made a request to be taken to the prison where the murderer of her family was incarcerated. They brought him out, and the guard made him stand up and look her in the eye. And she walked up to him and put her hand on his hand and said, I forgive you. I forgive you. Her story is titled to tell. Left to tell. You are left to tell. My evening sun is going down, and those of my generation who were eyewitnesses and participants in a great nonviolent revolution. But you, my friends, are left to tell. And in your time and in your space, you can, you must, you will make a difference in your historic and your prophetic moment. Thank you.
Dr. Moss, as you can hear and see, the message was very well received. And my heart is still, wow, jumping all over the place. You know, not only did I get a history lesson, but I received quite a bit of spiritual food this afternoon. That's been a couple of weeks, the nation's going to celebrate Dr. King's birthday. As far as I'm concerned, I've celebrated it today. So I'm going to again pass the mic to Dr. Moss, and he has said that he will entertain us with a couple of questions before he flies in the air to parts unknown.
We're going to have two mics. One for questions and one for answers. Thank you. And thank you for your hospitality.
Many of just totally.
That is a scripture which says, how does it go? And Mary took all of these things in her heart and pondered them. I'm going to pass my mic back and let you go on.
I do have a question. You were saying at the end that we need to carry on the message that we are here to tell. How can we continue with that message without really living it like you did? To have that same type of vibrancy and the passion that you had, that you've seen. I mean, what can we do so that others can listen to us and tell a story and have others be inspired like we have been by you today?
It does not have to be dramatic. It does not have to be before countless numbers of cameras and news reporters. But in the space you occupy and the time that you have, you can be a witness and a worker to push civilization and culture a righteous inch where you stand. And sometimes when you do that, you create a movement. Sometimes you will die and nobody will know your name. But that's all right. God knows. Everybody, Dr. King says, can be great because everybody can serve. And that is all that is necessary. Dr. King did not go to Montgomery, Alabama at 25 years old, called, I think, when he was 24, to win a Nobel Peace Prize. He went to give his best to a small, distinguished congregation. And look what happened. There were also others there who worked just as hard, who incurred just as much danger, and we will never know their names. But they made it possible for the prophetic thrust to go on. Somewhere, 50 years ago, somebody gave me a poem, and I cannot remember it. If you cannot make the journey up the mountain steep and wide, you can cheer within the valley as the multitudes go by. If you cannot climb the mountain, you can be like her and Aaron holding up the prophet's arms. And it might be a few minutes in terms of the way we count time. It might be a few years or a few decades. But no one is excused from doing all that she can or he can while we're able. Thank you.
We thank you more than we can ever say. We'll be thanking you for days and weeks and months and years to come for what you brought us. Just want to close it out by thanking all of you for changing your schedules to be with us. I want to remind all of the learners in our cohort interdisciplinary program that the MLK Studies program, this is like the doors of the church are open. And I'm an Episcopalian. But the MLK program is open and available to learners in all three of the concentrations. So we hope that you will choose to move your inch in concert with all of us. To our special guests, we hope that this was an experience you'll want to repeat when we have the Legacy Luncheon in July. We'll certainly want to host you once again. And to President Sublette and Rich Hansen, our provost, and Larry Preston, all of us want to tell you how very, very grateful we are for the genuine and continuing support you give to the MLK Studies program. Thank you all. Now, the one that you don't know about, who is really, really good at things, who just has taken care of every single detail, Nicole Mays. Like making sure Dr. Moss got picked up from the airport. But Dr. Moss, on behalf of all of us in the union community, what we really have to give you is a demonstration of our commitment inch by inch. And while you're watching that, learning of that, hearing of that, maybe you'll have this gift as well. Thank you so much. Have a great day.